Okay, now we can start. What's up, humans? My name is David, and I help people develop self-awareness, and today I'm giving you the punchline of the whole channel. We're going to talk about what does deeper you even mean.
But what is this? What's this? What's this? What's this? What's this?
In case you're new to the channel, what I try to do here is distill complicated stuff that I'm learning about what it means to be human and present it here on the channel in a way that is easy to understand so that we can all learn to love better. This video is basically like the punchline to the channel, or the end game. Basically, if you keep developing self-awareness, you eventually discover the deeper you. But before we go any further, something you really need to understand about all of this is that what we're going to talk about needs to be experienced. That's going to make talking about it, and therefore you understanding what I'm talking about, quite difficult. But with that said, here's a bunch of words structured in 3 points because I promised you a punchline, so this is the punchline to the whole channel. Check it out. 1. The feeling of being a self is an impression your mind is generating. That's the normal you. 2, there is a deeper you that does not use concepts and is just experience. 3, this matters a lot. Let me explain. In everyday life, we regularly talk as if there are different parts of us. And more or less, that's sort of what the deeper you, normal you thing is. The terms deeper you, normal you are metaphors for talking about 2 distinct aspects of the human experience, which very few people actually know about. But whether we are talking about an unfamiliar metaphor or a familiar metaphor, an old one or a new one, these ways of talking about ourselves really deserve our close attention. The bottom line is, the better these metaphors map onto our lived experience, the more helpful they will actually be. And wisdom is many things, but this is one of my favorite ways to talk about wisdom. Wisdom is basically, which stories do we believe about these different parts of ourselves? And ultimately, there is wisdom in this deeper you, normal you metaphor, which I believe is the most fundamental insight to help us in navigating our lives. But there's a problem. If nobody knows these terms, deeper you, normal you, how is it going to be helpful to anybody? Well, this would probably be a good time to mention that I didn't invent this stuff, I didn't make it up, I didn't discover it, and it goes by a bunch of other names. But the problem with all these other names and terms is that they sound either really, really weird or just super confusing, and my goal here on this channel is to make what I'm sharing as normal and as easy to understand as possible. No promise on the normal part, that's just not my strong suit. So I chose the terms deeper you, normal you, so that it doesn't sound weird and out there and like scare people away. But with that said, let me take a moment and kind of clue you in on a few of the other terms that are used to refer to this deeper you, normal you phenomenon. In some circles, the deeper you is referred to as unitive consciousness, non-dual awareness, or pure experience. But you kind of sound like a crazy person. I don't feel like most people would take you very seriously. Even though those are basically perfect descriptions of the experience. But again, if you haven't had the experience, all of this just sounds like crazy talk, really. Now, if you come from a Christian background and you're fluent in Christianese and that doesn't throw you off, then I absolutely recommend that you pick up Immortal Diamond by Richard Rohr. Solid. In here, Richard Rohr refers to the deeper you, normal you under many, many different names. I think one of the terms that he uses is the experiencing self for the deeper you and the thinking or the conceptual self for the normal you. That's really helpful. In academic circles, most likely you're going to hear this referred to as consciousness and ego, where consciousness is the deeper you, but again, consciousness is just a very confusing term. And then ego Everybody thinks of Freud's ego, and the Academy has largely moved on from that, so that's not exactly what it's referring to. But if you do need some solid research to go Google about the ego, about the normal you, default mode network is your key. Amazing stuff. All right, now this is the point where my evangelical optics committee really wants me to tell you that this is all in the Bible and don't even worry about it, okay? Deeper you, normal you, it's in there. But it is and it isn't. What I would say is I don't think that the Bible writers had this concept clearly in mind when they were writing. But it does almost seem to pop up. It seems like it may be being referred to here and there. But it seems to me that that is just a product of the fact that it's part of our embodied nature, right? This is part of how God created us. So it shouldn't surprise us that it seems to show up here and there in the scriptures. But very importantly, the normal you is not your flesh. It's not the fallen or sinful part of you. It is limited, and we'll get to that, but it's not like the bad parts of you. The feeling of being a self is an impression that your mind is generating. That's what the normal you is. Let me sort of cut to the chase here. If you learn to observe your experience, you will first notice that it feels like you are sort of in your head. But then if you continue to investigate your experience, you will eventually realize that there definitely is no you in your head. But this is initially quite difficult to notice or to recognize because the normal you is so normal. And in fact, why should we investigate our experience? Why should I be sort of like questioning the most basic part of me-ness? Well, the answer is love, but hey, don't distract me. This video is already long enough. Here is a basic question to get you started on investigating your experience. Where are you experientially, right? Where do you most feel like you are? Like, are you in your hand? Are you in your foot? It's easy to start getting distracted by like the right answer. Like, I am my whole body, or like, the real me is in my heart. But these are thoughts about yourself. Return to your experience. Where does it feel like you most are? You, and all of us, feel like you are in your head, as if sort of riding around a little behind your eyes, maybe? There is a name for this, by the way. This is called a homunculus. Homunculus is a philosophical thought experiment, or started as a philosophical thought experiment, and it's the idea of like a smaller being riding around in the head of a larger being and doing the experiencing and or controlling that being. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it again. If you learn to observe your experience, you initially discover that it feels like you're in your head. But if you continue to observe and investigate your experience, you eventually realize there is no you up there. There is no homunculus. Moment to moment, your mind is stitching together different aspects of your experience and presenting it to you as you. The point is that the normal self is not as real and as concrete as it initially seems. We are just all day, every day, kind of looking past the cracks in this normal you. But it is just a feeling of you-ness. Every once in a while, I hear someone say that the self is an illusion. And I'm always sort of like, ugh, because I know what that must sound like. That is the stupidest thing unless you start experiencing this deeper you stuff. You start realizing the way that the normal you is constructed and pieced together. You eventually realize that that's precisely correct. The normal you, the self, is an illusion. But there is a deeper you, a vast you. But the question is, are you ready to give up the normal you? Okay, now more than ever in this video, I am hoping that you will keep in mind that this is all a matter of experience and not so much about concepts. What I'm trying to convey to you in words is something that you can experience for yourself. So if you're having a hard time making sense of this conceptually, this is entirely normal. Probably the best place to start in trying to understand the deeper you is understanding the relationship between the deeper you and the normal you. I keep going like this as if they are mutually exclusive parts of our experience or totally separate parts of our experience, but that is not really the case. In fact, instead of being separate, one of them lives inside the other. And this starts to actually make a lot of sense if you keep in mind that the deeper you is the experiencing you, and the normal you is the conceptual you. Because of course, the knowing, which involves concepts and thinking, is just a subset of our broader experiential knowing. And so it is that the normal you actually resides within the deeper you. Again, let me try to get right down to the bottom line. The deeper you is not a separate you. The deeper you is with you in every moment. It is ever present, never fighting the normal you for control, just simply experiencing. In a way, the deeper you is just what the human experience is like when the normal you is sort of out of the way or relaxed enough or like sort of deactivated. But saying deactivated or relaxed, it makes it sound like this would be sort of an easy thing, a switch, you know? But I don't want to trivialize it, and if you've ever tried to like stop your thoughts from arising, then you know that this is not really sort of an easy switch to make. This is, for most of us, initially very difficult because it is the nature of the normal you to grasp. That is its job, its identity, its reason for being. And if you think about it, to be able to grasp something, it needs to have boundaries. It needs to be a limited object, right? So the normal you thingifies the world into objects by assessing or imagining boundaries around them so that it can grasp these things and use them. This is absolutely crucial in everyday life. It is such a fundamental part of what it means to be a human, is to be able to grasp things, whether intellectually, that we wrap our minds around them, or literally in the real world. And this is also the normal you's approach to selfing. A firm boundary around what is you and what isn't you. But as real as this boundary of you-ness feels, it is not absolute. The limits of the normal you are not the absolute truth about you. Okay, deep breath. We've already covered a lot. Mostly we've been talking about what is this stuff, but by now maybe you are wondering, listen, if this is not in the Bible and it's really difficult to talk about and almost impossible to actually notice in real life, why should I care about this? The sort of cheeky and pedantic answer is that if you are a Christian, you are called to love God with all of your mind, and the deeper you is a part of our mind that almost all of us are just basically ignoring all day, every day. And so, well, you should learn about this. But perhaps more meaningfully, I want to give you one last example of how there are different parts of us. I want you to imagine that you're having a fight with a family member. Maybe you're not shouting yet, but sure seems like that's the way it's headed. And in the midst of this, you're clearly not feeling on the same team, but somehow in this moment you are able to step back just enough from the situation, from your really, really strong feelings, and you just say, hold on, I want to do this differently. It seems almost like a stroke of luck when this happens in a fight, but what's going on there? Apparently there is a place or a space within you from which you can see other parts of you operating, but we don't really have a name for this space within us, this part of you that notices when things are going off the rails. By the way, in the instance of this fight, this is called emotional regulation, and it's really quite difficult, but it is actually sort of a skill you can develop. You can work on your emotional regulation. And so if this is something that you can practice, it sort of begs the question, like how good at that could one get? Could we practice it enough that we can step back into that sort of calmer mental state almost no matter how difficult the situation is? Could we step back far enough to see the entirety of the rest of ourself more clearly? Could we step back confidently enough to be able to offer compassion to even the most hurting and fearful parts of ourselves? And whatever it is that we are stepping back into, could we become familiar enough with that space that we give it a name? This is the deeper you. And it's an aspect of our humanity that is available for all of us to become more and more familiar with. You see, all of your suffering, all of your shame, anger, and fear, this is all the normal you. Your experience of separation from God, this is the normal you. Your selfishness and your self-hatred, this is the normal you. And every iota of discontent and your psychological stuckness of every kind is the normal you. By contrast, the deeper you knows no fear. The deeper you already knows that all separation from God is an illusion. This deeper you, normal you stuff, this is an invitation for all of us to give up on our personal salvation projects and to accept God's grace all the way down. It definitely does initially sound pretty out there and maybe esoteric, but this is eminently practical. We are talking about the alleviating of suffering and the experiencing of God's unconditional love. We should all know and care about this stuff because life is confusing and the world is suffering. The deeper you knows love, but none of us know the deeper you. Now, likely those of you more practically minded than I am have already been thinking for a while, but how? And yes, there are practices for experiencing the deeper you, and this is precisely what the next video is about. But for today, I want to leave you with sort of a little gem to tie back to the previous video about loving ourselves. When we say that we need to learn to love ourselves, this normal self, this normal you, that's really the self we're talking about. The deeper you is already hidden with Christ in God. It knows no separation from God's love. And so it is the part of you which is able to offer compassion and acceptance and love to this smaller, limited, separate self that is the normal you. Alrighty, my friends, that's it for today. If you like this video, then hopefully you like this video. And if you want more of this kind of content, go ahead and subscribe. This whole channel is about developing self-awareness. And if you really believe in this work, if you want to help out and help me reach more people through this, you can hit me up on Patreon and support me that way. My goal is to turn this into a full-time job. This is all I want to do. I want to help people develop self-awareness so that we can all love more better. That's it. That's all. It's already too long. Like, subscribe, Patreon, and know your mind. Love your life.